Hello, I'm Howie
I'm
Sheriff,
Howie
and welcome to another special show from You Call This Yoga. Sorry for the slight delay. Technology can sometimes take a little longer as we're Skyping in our special guest, Marcy Goldstein, who will be sharing the language of yoga, Sanskrit, and how this can help all of us understand yoga a little better and expand our knowledge and practice and engagement. Our show is about building community in the concept of having yoga accessible for all. Our guests are sharing their expertise in their realms and also other ideas that we may come across in the conversation. We invite you, the viewers, to call in at 919-518-9773 with comments and questions. You can also Skype in at Computers 2K Voice or join the chat by logging in and typing in your message. We also have Amnon here right beside me, who is managing our technology and keeping the show rolling. Good morning, Amnon.
Good morning, Howie.
All right. I met Marcy a few years ago in looking to expand our offerings at Yoga Fest NC. Marcy taught a program on Sanskrit, and it received such rave reviews that we're bringing her back again this year. This is a continuing ed program for teachers. However, it's also open to non-teachers, and we'll touch base more on that soon. So let's bring on Marcy so that you can meet her. She's coming in from Charlotte, North Carolina. Good morning, Marcy.
Hi, Howie.
Thank you for
Thank
being.
you for having me.
Oh, you're welcome. Thanks for being our Valentine, because we're also looking to expand ways to access the heart. That's why she's got her red on, looking lovely. Marcy, tell us, how did you get introduced to yoga?
Well, I was a graduate student at UC Santa Barbara in the mid-1990s, and I was studying Asian traditions and yoga traditions. And that's really when yoga started becoming a thing, especially in California. And a friend of mine actually bought me an intro to yoga pass at the Santa Barbara Yoga Center, I think it was called. And I went and decided that I loved it and that it would be good to practice yoga and stay healthy in my body while I was in the middle of the rigors of graduate school. And so I was learning, the practice of yoga in conjunction with learning all of the philosophy behind it.
Santa Barbara is a wonderful center. That's also where our accessible yoga organization is based. And we had the founder and director, Jivana, on recently. I'd like to say Jivana several times because I mispronounced it so many times when he was on our show. But since speaking to you, I've gained some perspective on how to pronounce Sanskrit words.
Great.
Yes, that's been a revelation. And for our viewers and listeners, hopefully this revolution will reach your shores, which may be a little disruptive because revolutions are rather disruptive, but it'll help to bridge how languaging is very significant and that there are other meanings to words other than what we think they are. How did you get turned on to the idea of studying Sanskrit?
I think I've always been a language person. And when I went to grad school, we had to learn the language that we were reading so that we wouldn't depend upon other people's translations. And so, my first year of grad school, I dove into Sanskrit and I immediately became riveted by it. The grammar is really fascinating and intricate. It's just a really fascinating sound system and I just immediately loved it. And I think it was like by the time I got into second year of Sanskrit, we were translating the Bhagavad Gita, and it was just extremely satisfying to dive into the words and the grammar and to know that it was my own translation. And it hooked into yoga, obviously, and so I just, it was a calling, I think, and I just took it every single semester, and then I ended up studying it in India as well with a traditional teacher there. And it's just like a bird's eye view into this culture that I just always thought was extremely satisfying and fascinating.
Agreed. Uh, for those that may not be so versed in the ancient text, could you describe a little bit about what the Bhagavad Gita is?
Sure. So the word Bhagavad Gita means Song of God, or because the grammar is so fascinating, it can actually also be translated as sung by God. And, if there was a text that is the most maybe well known in the Hindu tradition, it would be the Bhagavad Gita. But really, this text transcends religious boundaries of time and space. And it's a text about yoga. The word yoga is mentioned hundreds of times in there. And it's an epic. It's the most famous portion of a larger epic called the Mahabharata. And it's this great story about a protagonist whose name is Arjuna, and he's having a nervous breakdown or a real crisis of action as he's on a literal battlefield that is supposed to be understood metaphorically by everybody who reads the text. And it's a crisis of action. He's not sure if and how he should engage his dharma, which is his duty. And he's about to put down his bow and arrow. But luckily, he has this charioteer whose name is Krishna, who gives him all this advice about why he needs to act. And that is, so the text is related to disciplined action. And so for him, even though it's difficult to engage in actions that might seem very challenging in different ways, it's his duty to engage in that action, which in his case happens to be needing to fight his cousins on the battlefield to make sure that, sort of ethically speaking, that good conquers evil. And so Krishna teaches him about disciplined action and not to be attached to the fruits of your actions. And that entire conversation is really infused with devotional fervor, because part of what he learns is that if he has a disciplined focus on God, that will inspire him to act correctly. And it kind of works in the reverse as well, so that when he is engaging in disciplined actions, that will help lodge God in his heart. And he'll act in a way that makes sure that Dharma reigns as opposed to adharma, which is chaos.
Ah, that is a mouthful. Thanks for sharing that.
Yeah, it's a great text.
Uh, for my yoga teacher training, I read the Bhagavad Gita too and appreciated this particular position as I've been in a quandary about acting against or acting in a situation where I had an adversarial problem. For me, I've referred to that passage and conversation as a motivation for me to persist in my pursuit of what I thought was good. And even though it was very arduous and at times very isolated, it has been helpful for me. The result for myself was mixed. However, the path that I took was very clear, and I would encourage viewers and listeners, teachers and practitioners, or those curious, to consider exploring this text and avoid being overwhelmed by all the foreign symbols and descriptions and breakdowns, and to look for what is the gist of this, because it is applicable in our current lives. Uh, there's issues that we're facing, whether it be directly personal, political, spiritual, religious based, that these texts can help you be more in touch with your spirit. Uh, I've come to find that Hindu texts are pretty parallel in some ways to Old Testament or Jewish texts, which lead to New Testament texts that can all have a similar message. Hopefully, that's a reasonable summary for me. How does that work for you,
Yeah.
Marcy?
Yeah, it's definitely a timeless text, and everybody can identify with Arjuna's plight, no matter what religion you might have signed up for, or maybe no religion at all, because it also relates to just kind of classic human psychology. And irrespective of gender, Arjuna is having a nervous breakdown because it seems really unpleasant to engage in this particular action. But the point is that you need to act without attachment to results and do the right thing just because it's the right thing to do, even if in the immediate, sort of situation you might experience some kind of pain. You have to try to engage the world. It's definitely a text about engagement and not the kind of yoga where you go sit on a mountaintop by yourself, but rather engage in the world in order to make sure that you play your role in contributing to righteousness and order. Because if you disengage, then the people around you might disengage as well, and then all hell is going to break loose.
Mm-hmm. Yes, I can appreciate that, because a lot of people can be very exhilarated in this current climate, and they could also feel pretty isolated and down. And this is an era where there is many channels for action that can be constructive. And I think that's an important element, is that we can do constructive actions to help build society, even if it's in conflict with some of what is in place right now, or doesn't feel as if it's in line with what's going on right now. How have you advanced the study of Sanskrit in your early years? Let's say over the first 10 years of your career, how did you take Sanskrit to the public?
Well, I never thought I would do that at all. I really just thought that I would end up being a professor somewhere in the country and translate text and read text and teach in a university environment. But as I was studying, some friends who owned a great studio in Los Angeles said, "Would you come teach us a little bit of Sanskrit? We're teaching yoga, and we know the anatomy and the physiology and sequencing and, a little bit about the philosophy, but we really don't know the language. And the language of yoga is really so integral to the entire thing that they appreciated that and said, come teach us a little bit." So I did, and it was really fun and a great sort of practical application of my, scholarly knowledge of this seemingly dead language, which is really not dead at all. And I just found it really rewarding. There's so many curious, smart people in the yoga world who are, seeking in so many ways. And I can teach them a little bit about the language in order to clarify mispronunciations and the deeper meanings of words, and really clear up some, social confusion, really, because sometimes people pronounce Sanskrit words differently. And so people sometimes don't know whether one pronunciation is the same word as a different pronunciation. So I can clarify that. And one of the refreshing things about Sanskrit, actually, is that there's really only one correct pronunciation for each word. There's no accents or dialects. And so there is a black and white to pronunciation. It's not like, if you're from Boston or New Orleans, that there's just different ways of saying things. There's really one correct way, which I teach people. And so it's just really satisfying and respectful to tradition, I think, to pronounce things correctly, and also helps unify people who are practicing different forms of yoga, because what everybody has in common, really, of course, is the language. So wherever you go to a yoga class, if the teacher is choosing to use Sanskrit words, you're going to know how to say them and what they mean, wherever you find yourself taking a class. And it just kind of grew from there. Eventually, I moved from Los Angeles to Charlotte, and I realized that I really have a passion for teaching. I'm definitely just a teacher at heart, and that I could share what I happen to know with people who are longing for, quality kind of rich understanding of yoga traditions. And I love meeting all the wonderful, adults in the Sanskrit classes that I teach that are usually part of teacher training programs. And in 2012, I founded this business called Sanskrit Revolution, just as a way to organize what I'm teaching. And thankfully, it keeps growing, really. And I am, really lucky to be able to teach at so many different yoga studios in the greater Charlotte area, and also up and down the East Coast. It's, I guess in a certain way a job, but also just my passion. It's just, I meet amazing people like you, and it's just, what can I say? It's just really fun. And I think that I contribute, usually a 3-hour intro Sanskrit class to teacher training programs. And it's a component of training that I think adds something different than what the lead teachers can offer, because Sanskrit's not their area of expertise. And so they kind of plug me in, and I get to share what I know and increase people's comfort level with this foreign language.
Mm-hmm. Well, I can appreciate that, because in my teacher training and subsequently in my classes, I use a minimal amount of Sanskrit. I can appreciate and have proven that I can abominate the language with the best of anyone. I already do that in my attempts to share Spanish, and I work with a crib sheet in that. Unfortunately, I've delegated that to someone who's bilingual. So I'll invite teachers to contact us and share what are your challenges in sharing Sanskrit with your classes. And if you're a student or new to yoga and you'd like to ask questions about that, please do at 919-518-9773. On Skype, computers 2K voice, and our chat where you must log in before you start typing. We're going to shift from all this talk and move to one of our pearls of wisdom, so that the viewers and listeners can get a sense of what Marcy and I are hinting at. Let's view the first pearl.
Our first pearl of wisdom is the Sanskrit word Shanti, which you may know means peace. And I usually refer to this word because it's a great example to show the connection between the sound of a word, the feeling that it invokes in the body, and the meaning of the word. So since Shanti means peace, you can see that the sound sh really exemplifies and brings out and is expressive of its actual meaning. It's way more peaceful, a sound, than the English word peace. If you say Shanti out loud, you'll invoke peaceful vibrations in your own body and in the bodies of anybody who is listening. You can also say it on the level of thought to invoke that very peaceful sound. And even on the level of imagination, you can try it. So let's try it now. Shanti. Shanti.
Thank you. Viewers and listeners, consider just sharing that Shanti within you as we share the show. I'll try to say lots of SH words just to keep it peaceful. And consider what your experience is, how it feels, and let us know about it because we'd love to hear your feedback. Marcy, there's a certain peacefulness about Shanti. How does that come across in some of the texts? Where is Shanti often used?
Well, the word Shanti comes up at the end of lots of mantras as I think a way to close out the experience. Can I explain a little? Can I explain a little bit more about why it's so peaceful physiologically?
Oh, absolutely.
Okay, so if anybody were to study Sanskrit, you'd see that the letters are all organized in this incredibly organized chart that is not completely different from a periodic chart of elements, which categorizes sounds in many different ways. And the word Shanti, the root sound of Shanti is shh. And one of the ways that Sanskrit organizes sounds is according to whether the sounds are voiced or voiceless, which people who are musicians or maybe speech pathologists or other sort of medical professionals might understand this from a sort of medical training. But voiced and unvoiced sounds refers to whether the vocal cords are moving like this or whether they're still. And shh happens to be a sound where the vocal cords are still. So if you take your hand and put it on your voice box, you'll notice when you're saying vowel sounds, which are voiced, that your body is actually moving, the vocal cords are moving. So we can just try saying the short vowel A, just to get a feeling of the movement here. So you can go like this. Do you feel that movement? But when you're saying the sound shh, your vocal cords are actually still. Mm-hmm. Shh. So the sound is literally quieting the body. So it's a great example of a sound that is really sort of expressive of its meaning, which calming and quiet. Shh is also one of these sounds that you can hold continuously. It sort of floats through the air in a continuous way, whereas other sounds just end. Like there's no way to hold the sound ka. It just stops. So if you wanted to say a lot of ka, you'd have to say ka 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 ka, which is not particularly soothing. But when we say shh, which is, I think, a very natural sound cross-culturally that people use to calm agitated people, we can see why people choose this sound, because the vocal cords are still, so the body is literally still, and you're able to hold it. Shh, which is much more soothing than saying ka 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 ka, which probably wouldn't have relaxed Arjuna on his battlefield, or anybody who's on their battlefields of life. So it's no surprise to me that the word Shanti shows up in some mantras as a way to help quiet and focus people's minds. And that's just a little bit about why that sound is calming sort of physiologically. And yeah, does that make sense? Or is there,
oh, yes. Yes. As I was listening, I was playing with my vowels and consonants and can appreciate all that you're sharing. Teachers, how do you think you can incorporate sounds into your class? Students, what sounds seem unfamiliar or uncomfortable for you? We'd like your feedback. In the meantime, for Marcy, are there suggestions for teachers first and students second for incorporating just a little bit more Sanskrit into class? I know it's a very broad realm of asking what teachers can do when every class may be different, but are there some other elements that you suggest that could bring more Shanti into their class?
Yeah, sure. Well, when I teach, I do make sure to say that I want to open the Sanskrit window and that there's not a need to absolutely use Sanskrit in classes, especially in introductory classes. You don't want to deter people from coming by throwing a lot of multisyllabic foreign words at them. But I think it would be great to open classes, as lots of people do, with a certain kind of centering sound, maybe Om, or even chanting the word Shanti, which I think is a more inherently peaceful sound than the word peace. Although you can choose soothing sounds in any language, that would work. The point is that the sound connects to a feeling and connects to a meaning. So if you choose a sound that connects to a feeling of calm, which also then means calm, and you can choose, any word that, feels comfortable, I think that would be a great way to start a class. And if you want to introduce your students to the Sanskrit names for the postures, which, similarly, just like Shanti, can reflect a deeper meaning of the word, you might choose one posture at a time, not to overwhelm a class with a lot of Sanskrit, but maybe choose a word of the month, maybe, and use that in each class for a month. I might suggest choosing postures whose words are etymologically related to English. Sanskrit, by the way, is a language that is in the same family as English. They're both Indo-European languages. So sometimes if you find a vocabulary word in Sanskrit that sounds like an English word, it's quite possible that they do have historical connections, such as Trikonasana. So everybody probably knows that as triangle. And it is the case that the number tri is just like our number 3, or uno, dos, tres, un, deux, trois, all those other European languages. So I'm not sure. It's hard for me to know what people already realize, I guess, when they're in class. But if it's not already really obvious, the tri of Trikona is the 3 that we know as triangle. And so maybe just choose that posture first, and then move on to a different one each month until those foreign words are a little bit more familiar to students, which takes away that sort of, apprehension, I guess, about a foreign language. You can own it if you take baby steps into it, I think.
Great. Well, my seat is getting warm, which means that it's time for our fun and yum good health tip. So besides bringing peace to our viewers and listeners today, we'll also look to expand what could be healthy for you. So let's move towards You Call This Yoga, this week's sponsor, hosting our show by me, the director, and learn about this good health tip of the week. We're ready. Avocados can be considered a superfood. They're packed with vitamins, minerals, and non-saturated fats. That's important because these fats can help transport other minerals into your cells. So that's why plant-based fats can be healthier than animal-based fats. Let's make some guacamole in a tried and true way where you can have 4 of the 6 essential elements for flavor as discussed by Arthur Gordon of Irregardless. Let's take our pre-cut avocado. Quarters is good. And we'll just put it in the bowl, trying to get the outer element of the avocado in there because that's where a lot of the fat is. Try to keep the bruised parts off of the dish. Sure. It's live demonstration. You never know what you're going to find, and I only have 1 avocado. So we're just clearing out using the spoon, trying to get the skin in there. I've also pre-cut a lemon, and I use 1/4 of a lemon for every avocado. You see I've got pretty much down to the skin. I use a conventional old-timey chopper. I find that that works really well. Keeps my hands mostly clean. And as long as I don't chop my fingers, then it's pretty neat. So we've gotten it pretty well chopped up. And I'm going to add some of the lemon. I've actually cut out the fibrous part and cleaned out the pits so that I'm not cleaning pits out of my wonderful dish here. I create a pool of citrus here with the lemon. I'll take sea salt that's unground and do 4 turns. 4 turns. 3, 4. Good. I'll take 6 little shakes of chili powder. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. And I'll take a count of 4 for the garlic, sprinkling it, not pouring it. 3, 4. Good. Go back to my masher. Mash it all up. I can use my spoon if I like. And what I've done is created a nice combination of sweetness from the avocado, sour from the lemon, bitter from the garlic, and salt from the sea salt. The biggest question is, what chips are you going to use and what fat is in there? I have a quinoa black bean corn chip. Why don't you try it, see how it tastes, and let me know. Well, viewers, ready for a little snack? It'll take a little time, but you can make guacamole in 2 minutes with just a little bit of preparation. Feel free to email me by clicking on contact at the bottom of the screen. It'll have my email there. If you have any questions about anything we're discussing. As you may have remembered, if you've seen the show, Arthur was on a couple weeks ago, and he was sharing the 6 elements of an exquisitely tasting dish. I think the other elements are some heat and some mame, which can also be found in mushrooms. So let's archive that. But let's move back to Marcy and sharing more about Sanskrit. Marcy, when you're teaching, let's say in the last 5 years, who are your audiences and have they changed over time?
The audiences are usually teacher trainees and other people who are kind of committed yogis, I guess. People who really want to dive into all the various different limbs of yoga, which would include, philosophical teachings and just an overall appreciation. And language is obviously a foundational component. I wouldn't say that the people that I teach have changed exactly, but rather I get to meet more and more people as the years go on. I think this is the 5th year that I'm teaching in teacher training programs, kind of around the country, but mostly up and down the East Coast. And I think that before people get into my Sanskrit class, they don't really know much about it. And don't really have an appreciation for it, therefore. But when they kind of learn all that there is to learn, their eyes kind of open wide. And thankfully, I think people really appreciate what I have to offer. And I also teach a history class, a history of yoga class, or yoga through the ages, sometimes I call it, which is a 5,000-year tour de force through yoga history. And I situate people, texts, and traditions within history. And obviously that includes a lot of Sanskrit. So Sanskrit is always the sort of underlying, the thing that pins everything together. But likewise, maybe people don't really have an interest in history, maybe flashbacks to boring classes in high school, possibly. But it is a really interesting way to appreciate and to to get to know the history of your own lifestyle. And yoga is obviously a lifestyle for lots of people. Maybe it's a spiritual path or a religion or fitness program. I mean, people call it different things, obviously, and it's different things for different people. But knowing where it came from and what it could be and where it's going, it helps people own it, I guess. And so people, I think, really appreciate learning something about the history. And I give everybody a very long recommended reading and viewing list so they can continue to educate themselves. And so just, I called it a Sanskrit Revolution because I hope it's my grassroots way of bringing appreciation of Sanskrit and the importance and centrality of it really into people's lives. And just really grateful that I get to do it.
Now, you mentioned Sanskrit Revolution. Let's clarify your website, which is called sanskritrevolution.com. What might one expect to find on your website that could help enhance their knowledge of Sanskrit? What could
Well, right now it's not really an education tool yet, actually. It's more right now a place where people can go to get ideas about what I can teach in their training programs. So there's just a little bit about my background, just to kind of explain that I learned Sanskrit in a really quality sort of way, I guess, at UC Santa Barbara, and also with this wonderful teacher who I met in India. And also there's another section on there that describes the different offerings so that people get a sense of what it is that they can learn. But right now there's no online teaching mechanism really, but that is definitely sort of coming down the pike. So really it's a way for people to understand what, or to choose what it is that they might want to have me teach their student. There's a whole my schedule is up there too, so people can find where I'm teaching and then maybe take a class if they would like to.
Wonderful. Well, in lieu of having a glossary on Marcy's site, we'll have our next pearl of wisdom, which can give our viewers and listeners a little bit more insight. And when we come back, Marcy can share a couple of books that one might pursue. Thanks for the next pearl.
Pearl of wisdom number 2 is the Sanskrit word pranayama, which is classically mispronounced as pranayama, but it's actually pronounced pranayama. Do you want to try saying it? Pranayama, which you may know means breath control techniques, and I wanted to try to pick apart the Sanskrit for you so that you could see the really fascinating way that Sanskrit grammar can work. So you may recognize the root word here as prana, which means breath, and the second part of the word is ayama, which means to restrict or constrain. So you might think that it completely means to restrain the breath, which it does, but the really interesting thing that's packed into this word shows up right here in the long vowel A, which can include a short a that's a negativizing prefix. So if you include the negativizing prefix in conjunction with the word ayama, it doesn't mean to restrain, but it actually comes to mean the opposite, which is to release. So packed into this one word is this idea of the restricting and releasing of the breath, which is what happens when we do pranayama exercises. We constrict the breath and then we release it, which I think is really interestingly packed in to this one word in Sanskrit.
I know that it took me many attempts to switch from pranayama to pranayama. And even now, it's still an effort, and I probably don't pronounce it exactly as it could be. But that's part of a revolution, is that it's a strong change, and it takes time to really accommodate to it. What were the books that came to mind when I suggested some books for our readers or listeners?
For learning Sanskrit in particular?
Yes, getting a cursory and maybe a deeper sense of Sanskrit.
Right. So I suppose I would recommend for people who are a little bit brave a book called, I think it's called Teach Yourself Sanskrit. It's in the Teach Yourself series of books, and you can find it on Amazon. But I think it's a little bit of an oxymoron, actually, because you really can't teach yourself Sanskrit. You really need a teacher to hold your hand. It really kind of goes back to that value in yoga traditions where you should sit near a teacher and learn, which is actually the meaning of the word Upanishad. If anybody knows that body of text called the Upanishads, there's, I think, 18 classical Upanishads that date, mostly before the year 0. And they're philosophical texts that are sometimes conversations between a teacher and a student. Anyway, but I think the point is that you really need to have someone sort of guiding you through this language whose sounds are really powerful. And so learning it from a book might only be somewhat productive, really. But especially for grammar nerds, people who just love diving into languages, I would definitely recommend that book. And then maybe try to go to the American Sanskrit Institute, which I believe offers some classes. And I also have some online resources coming down the pike as soon as I have enough time to produce all of that. That will be available, and I hope will contribute to yoga teacher education sometime soon.
Wonderful. What would be the best way for people to connect with you?
Well, you can find my email address embedded in the website. I think there's a contact button. It sends an email to me at info@Sanskrit Revolution, or you can just email me at marcy@sanskritrevolution.com. And I love to teach and would be happy to speak to people about crafting a class that would enhance and complement the other classes that are offered at your studio. And I, enjoy sort of tweaking the class so that it really fits into whatever expression of yoga is going on at somebody's studio. So it could be an Ashtanga-based studio, in which case, of course, we would look at the opening and closing mantras from that lineage. Or if it's a fitness-based sort of space, we can dwell on correct pronunciation and really looking into the actual meaning of words if they're included in the class. Also, there's so much about the sounds that connect with how you feel. That there needs to be a deeper appreciation for the power of sound on the audible level, and then also on the level of the mind, so that people can really come to appreciate how their overall fitness includes an awareness of how sound affects the body. And I think we were actually going to talk about the 4 different levels of sound. Is now maybe a good time to do that?
Yes.
Okay. So just very briefly, this is drawn from some philosophical texts. The idea is that there are 4 different levels of sound, and only one of them is audible. And yogis know this, but the rest of us who are still learning might not know this as much. So the level of sound that you're hearing right now is, obviously the audible level of sound, and it's used for communication between people. Which is obviously very functional. And a more subtle level of sound is the realm of thought. So thought is also, a kind of speech, but it's more internal. but it's also very powerful. And as we all know, I think the inner conversation that we have can really affect how we feel. And an example of that, I think, is sort of negative chatter in the mind that we might have about ourselves can obviously give ourselves a stomach ache or a headache by having negative thoughts. So the idea, of course, is to have positive inner conversation. So that's a more subtle level of sound. And then even more subtle than that is the level of intention or imagination. And that is where like a thought is about to be born. It's just on the cusp of sort of emerging into your mind, but you haven't fully gelled a thought. That is a more subtle level of sound. And then the fourth level of sound is kind of the sea of consciousness or the sea of vibration from which all sounds emerge. And that can be understood as the sound Om, or just like the ocean of consciousness. And that ocean is obviously all pervasive in the three other levels of sound. And the takeaway from these different levels of sound really is that what you say, what you think, and what you imagine matters for your overall health, wellness, and fitness.
Mm-hmm. So
Yeah.
to reiterate and to break it into the smallest elements, we have the audible sound, we have the thought, we have the intention, and then we have the collective consciousness. Is that a fair description?
Yes, that works very well.
Let's see if I could retain that for more than 5 minutes. So viewers, feel free to experiment with your own inner sounds, play with your vowels, your consonants, and while we're playing with that, we'll get ready for our third pearl of wisdom and learn some of the basis of another Sanskrit term.
Our third pearl of wisdom is the Sanskrit word Anahata, which is the word that refers to the heart chakra in some of the chakra systems. So you may or may not know that the word Anahata actually means unstruck. So this is the negativizing prefix here, un, and here is the main part of the word. So it means the unstruck sound. And this sound reverberates in the heart space along with the seed mantra, which is pronounced yum. And I thought I'd bring that up now in honor of Valentine's Day, when we're all trying to open our hearts. And this sound is the seed sound that can help us do that. So let's practice pronouncing both of these words. The heart chakra is called Anahata. Try saying Anahata. And the seed syllable is pronounced yum. Say yum. Yum. Happy Valentine's Day.
Just eventually with Marcy's coaching is that the third syllable from the end of the Sanskrit word is the most strongly pronounced. And I try to keep this rule of languaging somewhere in my head henceforth so that I avoid mispronouncing names, poses, and concepts. The other thing I noticed was that Marcy was sharing the word yum. If I remember correctly, and I hope I am, that in an interview, the Dalai Lama was cited as often going around citing in his head yum or something very similar. Does anyone have that recollection too, or am I just dreaming that? What are your thoughts, Marcy?
I have not heard him speak about that, but it's possible because it is a sound that reverberates in the heart space, and clearly the Dalai Lama is trying to help us all open our hearts in order to spread kindness throughout the world.
Okay. Well, I think I read that somewhere. I'll go to bat for that one. We'll see if the Dalai Lama can call in and clarify that. But let's also talk about the concept of the third syllable from the end. Are there other words that come to mind that we should consider our focus and pronunciation in our daily practices? Anything that comes to mind for you, viewers and listeners? Anything that comes to mind that you'd like us to clarify? I know I have one in mind that will be at the end of the show, but we do have 919-518-9773 for you to call in. Computers 2K Voice on Skype. You can also chat in by putting in your what do they put in for the chat?
Just anything.
Log in.
They can put the real name, handle.
Great. So come chat with us. We'd love to hear what you're thinking and experiencing. Marcy will be sharing the history of yoga and Sanskrit course at YogaFest NC. It's a 2.5+ hour experience where she's merging some of the greatest insights that she's developed over the years into a special program that you'll come away with a whole nother sense of languaging.
And registered yoga teachers will receive continuing ed units if that, entices people.
Yes. Most teachers at YogaFest NC are 500 level teachers. However, we do have special continuing ed channels for teachers to dive deeper. And why Marcy's on the show is because yoga is more than just a physical practice. There are many limbs on the yoga tree, and the ability to connect to language and concepts and the readings is also part of the focus in life. Yoga is a life science, and hopefully one that you feel, viewers and listeners, that is in confluence with your religion of choice or no religion at all. Marcy, besides Yoga Fest, are there other programs that you'll be involved with in the near future?
Thankfully, yes. I'll be returning to the Southeast Yoga Conference in Atlanta in September, which is a wonderful, growing conference that is drawing instructors from all over the country. Highly recommend it. And in July, I'll be teaching for the first time at the Asheville Yoga Festival, which I'm really excited about.
Mm-hmm. Yes. Asheville Yoga Fest is a wonderful experience. They have new directors at Asheville Yoga Fest who have taken the program to another level. I've been in contact with them. I've tried to get on their teaching schedule with no success, but maybe next year, in trying to bring adaptive yoga to the community there. That's wonderful. Viewers and listeners, please consider visiting Marcy's website, sanskritrevolution.com, where you can contact her for more information, clarification, and such. All right. Now, since no one else has come up with other words, Marcy, please help us understand the word that I believe is spelled like this. N-A-M-A-S-T-E.
Okay, sure. Do you want to try to take a stab at pronouncing it, or you want me just to offer?
Well, I'll use my current knowledge or perceived knowledge and think of it as namaste. But I hadn't read the literal Sanskrit writing, nor know anything about it. Was I at least within the room? How is it actually pronounced?
Oh, okay. So I'm glad you asked. It's a great word. So it's pronounced namaste. Yeah, it's just pronounced namaste.
Mhm.
A little bit less complicated vowel than you said before. So the word again is namaste. And there's actually two parts to the word, namas plus te. And namas is a word that means name or honor. And te is, for the language nerds out there, is a second person pronoun. It means you. So the word most literally means honor to you. And I do hesitate to say a literal translation because there's always something slightly lost in translation when you're going from one language to another. But most literally, it means honor to you. And it's obviously a word that's used in a bi-directional sort of way. So I honor you, you honor me. And in a very poetic sort of way, there's lots of other words that are packed in, meaning I honor the light in you, you honor the light in me, and all of that's fair, with a poetic license taken to offer a, sort of more flowery, meaningful translation rather than simply honor to you. And it's a great word.
Wonderful. So let's review the three pearls for today. Talked about um, Shanti.
Shanti.
We talked about the heart center and pranayama.
Pranayama.
Pranayama. See, I'm still
Yeah.
working on it, but at least I got jivana down.
Yeah.
Hopefully you're listening, jivana. So I appreciate your time and wisdom and willingness to participate with us. We're just going to shift a little bit and talk about Yoga Fest that's coming up on April 8th, where Marcy will be teaching along with several other excellent teachers who are doing the continuing ed program. We'll have Barbara Vosk, Carol Krukoff, and Cheryl Fenner Brown. We invite you to visit the You Call This Yoga Facebook page, where our event information will share more details. We're having some challenges with our event software, and registration is temporarily closed, but will be open again on February 22nd. Feel free to learn more about that. We'll also be having Barbara Vosk next week and Carol Krukoff the following week to share their insights about yoga for stress management, and with Carol, yoga for seniors. We'll also put a shout out to the Accessible Yoga Organization, who's having their conference in New York. I believe it's May 19th to the 21st. I'll be on a panel sharing community-based yoga, as our mission with You Call This Yoga is to help the physically challenged and underserved improve their life with yoga. They've been our hosts today, and we're happy to do that. We welcome your feedback about guacamole and any other items on the show. In the future, we'll also be having some teachers from this accessible yoga organization. Diane Bondi will be on in March, and we're still trying to invite national leaders such as Sherry Clampett and Matthew Sanford. Anyone with channels for them, let them know I've been reaching out. I also welcome other recommendations for guests on the show. Sponsors, we reach thousands and hope that you'll consider sharing accessible yoga. I'd like to thank Marcy Goldstein, a professor at the University of North Carolina in Charlotte. Her website is sanskritrevolution.com, where you can connect with Marcy. Marcy, if you'll just share just a little chant to close the show.
Sure. I just also want to say thank you so much for having me on your wonderful show. And the takeaway that I would like to leave people with is that all levels of sound create a vibration. So what you say, what you think, and what you imagine has an impact on your overall health and wellness. So with that in mind, maybe close with a simple Om.
Om. Beautiful. Thank you, Marcy, and our viewers and listeners. We look forward to your feedback. There's an option to rate the show. We'd love to hear from you and learn how to share accessible yoga more fully and in a way that you can embrace it. Namaste.
You're tuned to the Nissan Communications Network. If you tuned in too late, you can always watch each program in its entirety or download an MP3 audio file of it in the archives section on nissancommunications.com. Don't forget to subscribe to our YouTube channel, follow us on Twitter, and like us on Facebook. Sponsored by Atomos.com, makers of quality video recorders and converters, CarolinaApparel.com, and DeltaForce.net.